Hello, my name is Graham Shearer. I am the Associate Pastor of East London Tabernacle Baptist Church, and this is the fifth in a series of videos looking at the book of Ecclesiastes and drawing some connections between what we find there and the current circumstances that we're in. The book of Ecclesiastes is the record of the investigations of the teacher into life under the sun, life under the limitations of time and space, life and death in which we all live. And the teacher has been showing us that life under the sun is vapor. That's the way we're translating the word translated meaningless in the NIV. That this is a world that is elusive, ephemeral, that doesn't submit itself to our control. And so here in chapter 7, the passage that we're looking at in this video, he files his interim report in his investigations. He tells us the conclusion he's come to after all the different paths that he's gone down, searching for the right way to live. And he begins in chapter 7 by telling us the location of wisdom, where it is we should go to find wisdom. He begins by saying that the day of death is better than the day of birth. That we should go not to the house of feasting, but to the house of mourning in order to find pleasure. Now, the teacher says that not because he's against laughter and joy. We've seen that he commends those things time and time again, but rather that he's against the kind of banal, glib laughter that tells us lies about ourselves and our world. The teacher says we should go to the house of mourning because it is there that we learn our limitations. It is there that we learn our mortality and our frailty, our destiny, which is common to all of us. The teacher says it's in the house of mourning that we learn the most essential lessons about life, that we are finite, that we are limited. And what the teacher says about the house of mourning could perhaps also apply to the house of lockdown. We can learn the same lessons in this crisis as the teacher teaches us in chapter 7. Because if this crisis has taught us anything, it is that we are limited, that we are mortal. It will be some time before we know exactly how many lives have been lost through the coronavirus. But one thing that has already happened is that death appears on our news screens more and more often. The drum roll of mortality that was always in the background of life is now front and center. We should mourn those deaths as we hear about them, but we should also heed their message, the wisdom that they impart. The message that we are mortal, that we share the same destiny as everyone else, that we are limited. And the teacher explains that a life which looks at our limitations in the eye will be without things like greed that leads to bribery, anger, impatience, even nostalgia, because those things flow out of the lie that we should be, or we could be, masters of our destiny. But rather, once we learn from the house of mourning that we are not, that we are limited, then patience and contentment and peace have become possibilities. And so the teacher says that we should go to the house of mourning, to the house of lockdown, to learn wisdom. But that wisdom has limitations. The limitation of wisdom is that it cannot guarantee protection against life's tragedies. Yes, wisdom is a shelter, but it is a limited one, because there is a crookedness to life that no one can straighten. That's why the teacher makes these extraordinary statements in chapter 7, verse 16, where he says, "Do not be overwise, or do not be overrighteous." What does he mean? He means don't pursue wisdom and righteousness as if they will insulate you from all the sorrow and all the darkness of life. Don't think that they give you an exemption from the crookedness and the tragedy that is common to man. And of course, the coronavirus crisis teaches us the same thing. In the end, no amount of skill in living or diligence in washing our hands can finally protect us from the coronavirus or any other source of sorrow in this life. We all live perpetually vulnerable, and neither righteousness nor wisdom in any amount can insulate us from that fact. If we pursue wisdom and righteousness, the teacher says, for that reason, then they will have a kind of brittle, intense quality to them. Instead, we need to look the crookedness of life in the eye. A crookedness that extends to our own hearts, which are sinful rather than righteous. And learn to accept the good days and the bad days that come from God's hands. And because wisdom is limited, because life is crooked in a way that we can't straighten, because we are crooked in a way that we cannot straighten, in the end, the teacher says, wisdom is inaccessible to us. That's what he says in verses 23 and following. I was determined to be wise, he says, but this was beyond me. Because this world is crooked, because we are crooked, because this world is a world of vapor, ephemeral, enigmatic, elusive, finally understanding how this world works, understanding how all the pieces fit together, why one thing follows on from another, is beyond us. And we should not be fooled by our ability to construct computer models or to accumulate Christian paperbacks on our bookshelves into thinking that we will ever be able to unravel the mysteries of life. It is always beyond us, always defying our limitations. Our crookedness can never be straightened. And that's why what the teacher means in his strange words in verse 28. He's not comparing the relative merits of men and women, but saying that his search for the upright lady, Lady Wisdom herself, has been futile. In the end, he has not been able to find the answers that he seeks in his life. So the teacher files this interim report on wisdom, and his conclusion is that finally, though we can learn much from the house of mourning, though wisdom can be a shelter, in the end, wisdom is limited and finally inaccessible. Given our limitations, given our mortality, our crookedness, solving the puzzle of life will always be beyond us. And there is no better time for us to learn that lesson than this present crisis. Because the coronavirus teaches us our mortality, our limitations, in tangible ways that many of us have never experienced before. But the question is, where do we go once we've learnt that lesson? Whether we learn it in the house of mourning or in the house of lockdown. We might think that the only conclusion is to despair, to conclude that life is screwed up and we cannot straighten it, that we are crooked and we cannot straighten ourselves, and that therefore we should just throw our hands up in despair. It's a great fallacy to believe that just because we cannot do something, just because humanity as a whole cannot do something, that something cannot be done. It's a fallacy that starts with the premise that we are the most powerful, the most able beings in the universe. But the teacher pushes us to see our limitations not so that we will throw our hands up in despair, but so that we will cling on to the one who is unlimited. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, the teacher will say in chapter 12. As we realize our own crookedness and the crookedness of life, we should be driven to the one who is always upright and righteous. As we realize our own mortality, we should be driven to the one who is life itself. As we realize how wisdom is beyond our limited minds, we should be driven to the one who is infinite wisdom himself. The one true God, creator of heaven and earth, Father, Son, and Spirit. Of course, his wisdom is often hard to discern. It was hard to discern just outside Jerusalem 2,000 years ago as a man died as a condemned criminal on a cross. And it may be hard to discern now as we sit cut off from friends and family, perhaps fearing for our health or for our jobs or our future. But what the Apostle Paul said about that cross 2,000 years ago, the cross of Jesus Christ, is as true about the crisis we're facing today. The foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. We may not know the end from the beginning. We may not be able to straighten this crooked world and our crooked hearts. But God does, and God can, and God has, by sending his Son to die, the upright for the crooked, so that we can come to him. As we stare our limitations, our mortality, our sin in the face over these next few weeks and months, and find that we have no answers to the problems life creates, let's turn our gaze to the one who does, the infinite God, who has given us his Son so that we might have life. Let's place our life in his hands and let him guide us through the house of lockdown, through the house of mourning, and into our eternal home, where there is life and joy and feasting forevermore.